Hello, welcome to Pay It Forward. Guess what? I'm being a flippity gibbet today. I've been accused of that before. It's probably with good reason. Actually, this little pattern came out of nowhere. I've just developed a sudden obsession for beautiful little boutique style bags, and I thought I'd take you all along for the ride. And it's a beautiful little fully lined bag with that really quirky little shape, and you can see it can be personalised really easily. So I've got a free pattern for you, and it's all ready. It's in the description box below. Once you get that link, you just need to print out those pattern templates on your own home printer. When you go to print those pattern templates out, do make sure that you set your printer to be printing at actual size, so that all of the pattern pieces are exactly right for you. And I do include all seam allowances in my patterns. So who's ready to make my new little patchwork bag? So let's have just a closer look at this one before we get started. So the bag itself is very simply put together. We've got a magnetic closure there. If you haven't used those before, I'm going to be walking you through that. Fully lined with a couple of pockets in there, and I've just used basic quilting cottons in prints for that one. I've used a heavier weight upholstery fabric for the front, and I do show you how to make up a beautiful little brooch adornment for the front there, little detachable strap, and also a bag charm there. So let's get busy making our little patchwork bag. Now let's have a look at what we're actually going to need to put this bag together. So I'm starting with my outer bag pieces, and I'm actually using an upholstery fabric here, so that's actually quite a strong fabric, but I still have interfaced it with my fusible woven interfacing just for some extra strength and keeps it all nice and flexible. And you've got your front and back pieces cut, and also a base piece there. Now the outer of the bag, of course, is going to be embellished. There's a few ways to do this, but I've given you a template for a center panel that I pop on there, and then I will be adding to that my different notions and trims, whatever you like. This is where it's really fun. It's such a creative little bag. And I will be adding a couple more pieces on the sides. You could perhaps, if you've got a machine that does some beautiful embroidery, machine embroidery, you could utilize that in the design. So many ways to do this one. Mine is very, very sweet and cutesy in color and patterns, but you could make it quite neutral, and it's really a very classy little bag. So that's entirely up to you. So we've got our outside pieces all done and all our trims. I'll also be adding a couple of buttons to that one. Now then we have our fold over flap, and that is put together in the same way. We've got our two pieces cut. I've actually cut my underside of the flap the same color as my lining, so just for it to all coordinate. And I like to have little bits and pieces. It's a very patchworky type of style that I'm going for. And again, I've got that center piece there, and I'm going to be adding my rickrack on the side there. And so you're going to need the same thing as you have for the front. We cut from lining fabric. So again, it's interfaced. I've got my two pieces there, and also my base piece there. And we will be adding, as I did show you, a little pocket, and that has our two pieces. No applications on that one, just our fabric. We're making a little fold over pocket. So we're also going to need some wadding, because I do add wadding to this bag. I've got a little fusible, very fine cotton wadding there. You need your two bag pieces, front and back, a base piece, and a piece for inside our little fold over tab. It just gives our bag some substance, and it gives it a really nice shape. So your feature part on your bag is your little front decoration on that tab that we put there. Now I actually make this up as a little brooch, so you'll get to see how to make a little fabric brooch up in the process. Saying that, we will need a little brooch pin. Because mine's quite big, and I couldn't find any longer brooch pins, I'm going to be adding two to mine so it sits nice and flat. So I've got those there. We're also going to be adding a handle. So you can either just sew your handle in, which I've got here already. And again, I've cut it from one of those inside prints. You can cut that one just from plain fabric and you can pop it into the sides. I'll show you how to do that. Alternatively, today I'm going to be actually adding my little D clips that I've got here, which will extend out from the bag, and we've got our 2 lobster swivel clips that our handle will be wrapped around. So that's if you want something that's got a little more structure and hardware with it. Otherwise, you can just sew this handle straight in. I'll show you how to do that. And we're also going to need a closure for our front flap, and I'm going with a nice magnet closure, very inexpensive and gives a lovely professional finish. Alternatively, you could just add a couple of pieces of Velcro. Perhaps if you're making that for a child, that would be suitable. So if you're making the little D clips, you're going to need a little bit of ribbon or a little piece of felt to fold over around that D clip, just like I have there. So we've got all of our trims and our notions. When we put this one together, that little felt brooch there, we've got our 2 outside felt pieces which have interfacing applied. We've got a filler in the middle which is stiffened felt, and my decoration on the front of this one, I'm using a little embroidered patch. Now I've given you an extra heart shape there, and you can cut that little heart shape out from any piece of fabric that's got a lovely little feature on it. So you might have a fabric that's got a beautiful little flower burst or something like that, or perhaps little characters like I have here, and we're going to be adding that to the front there. I'm also going to be sewing a beaded blanket stitch around the entire outside of that one, so that one will really stand out and become a feature. I'm going to be adding on mine a little lace skirt trim around the base, just to really pretty it up and girly it up, and I'll be popping that on with some extra braids. So the notions and so on that you choose just really depend on what sort of colours and styles you're going for with your project. This little bag can be made up very, very classy in all blacks and satins and chiffon trims, and really can look quite wonderful. So that's about it. We've got everything that we need. You're going to be needing some clear craft glue. You can use hot glue for adding our little attachments on the back of that brooch. I will be using my extra strong thread for sewing on those beads. Most of this is sewn on the machine, so it's quite an easy product, a little project to put together. So let's get started at the very beginning, and we're going to start our work on first get that little brooch badge made up. So the first thing I'm going to do is take one of my pieces, and I'm going to be adding my little pins for the back, just so that it's going to sit nice and flat when I pin that on in place. I'm going to hot glue those in place, and then I'm just going to slip that little piece of felt that I've got there in place, and I'm going to stitch either side just so that it's going to really hold those little pieces, and it keeps it all still looking pretty from behind. Not that we'll see that. That's the first thing that we do, is get those into place. And while I'm doing that and that's drying, I'm going to add my front little embellishment there. I'm going to get that one pressed on. I'll just stitch around it to stitch it into place, and then we will move ahead to put those 3 pieces together. So once you've got your little pins in place and your front panel, your front little whatever you've chosen to do there, I've got that pressed on and I've stitched all the way around, which you would do with your little heart shape as well. Now I've glued up, I've already gone ahead and glued on my, so what's it called? I can never think of what this is called. Stiffened felt. Stiffenfield, is glued on in the centre there, and then we're going to add our already glued up front panel. Just make sure it's all lined up well. Get those edges pressed into place there, and we're going to leave that one to dry totally before we put together, before we stitch our blanket stitch around it. Just make sure all of those edges are pushed together and it's all very nice and flat. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add my second little ribbon tab to my D-clip. That's if you're using your D-clips. I'll just take that one through. This ribbon tab is longer than I need, but I'd rather it was too long than not long enough. So I'm just going to glue that one into place, so I've got that. So once that glue is dried, we're going to get ready to sew our beaded blanket stitch around that edge. So just to show you the versatility of this little pattern, you can see there I've got a very neutral little owl and the concept of cutting your little heart shape from a feature fabric, which I've done there. But you can see I've added a few little bits and pieces, a little word, added a little bit of embroidery there and some buttons, and you can see that you can really create a beautiful little centerpiece for that flap. And you can see putting it with a neutral, this is a little upholstery fabric again. So you need to be, because these little bags are so full of punch with design, you need to be very bold with your choices. The most important thing a girl wears is her confidence. So, you know, don't be afraid to really embellish and make the most of this little design. So let's get started on this beaded blanket stitch. I've got a video that shows you how to sew this one. So I'm going to pop that up the top there, that link for that one up the top there, but I'll show you a couple of stitches here. So I'm using my extra strong thread, just got a knot in the end, and I have got a single strand. I've just come in between those layers and come out right on the edge there just to hide my knot. And now I'm just going to take my first stitch. So taking my needle through all of the layers and bringing my needle out through that loop and pulling that first stitch in nice and firm. Now before I make another stitch, I'm going to add a bead. So my beads here are probably about 4mm. Got to be large enough so that your needle and thread can pass through them. So I've added my bead there. I'm going to hold that one into place, and then I'm going to make my next stitch, should be about the width of your bead. Taking that through both layers just as before and coming out through the loop. And as you pull that one in, you'll see that little bead will sit beautifully between that stitch there. So remember, each time I like to hold that thread over my finger there. Each time I just add another little bead before I make that stitch. It does take a little bit of time, this stitch, but it's such a pretty result. So push that one down and make that same little 4mm stitch through both the layers and anchor that second little bead into place. You can see there. And you'll be surprised just how nice and neat and tight this little stitch sits. I'm going to make my way all the way around and we're going to end up with that lovely result there. You can see there with this one, it's a little bit smaller and I've used a smaller bead there. And you can use any colours you like. So there you can see that completed beaded blanket stitch. And remember too, if your project and style of your project is not a sweet little style like I'm doing here, you can just sew a blanket stitch in a nice contrasting thread, would work just as well, and leave those beads off. Now that's got that front brooch section completed. I may well add a couple of extra little flowers to this one, but I'll wait until the end and have a look at the overall balance of the bag. So, but that's just another option for adding your little embellishment. So we're going to put that one aside and we're going to start on our outer bag. And the first thing I've done is, because I'm using the centre panels that I've given you, I've pressed those into place, front and back, and I'm just going to be adding those and stitching those into place, adding my rickrack, so that will settle that little panel in place and also stitch on my rickrack either side. And I'm going to be adding an extra couple of rickrack strips just to bring some more detail into that one either side, and I won't be adding that on the back. So on the back I'm just going to be having just my centre panel and my 2 strips of rickrack, but it's up to you how much you add to the back panel. I'm going to focus all of my work on the front. Once you have all of your embellishments done on your front and back pieces of your bag, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to press that wadding into place. And you want to make sure that it's right in the centre. You should have room all the way around the outside. We do that with the front and the back. And also you can go ahead and also add it to your outer bag base. Again, there should be space all the way around the outside, and also the underside of that little bag flap. And that one also, make sure there's room right the way around the outside. I'm going to get those pressed into place. So now I've got my wadding in place on all of those pieces, and next step is to add a little magnetic closure, or perhaps you're using Velcro where you would just stitch on your corresponding parts just on the front there and on the underside. Make sure it's the underside of that flap. But I'm going to be adding a magnetic closure, and if you haven't used them before, I've given you the marks on your pattern pieces so you know exactly where to pop those. You just need to mark in your center point, which I've got there for you, and you need to just make 2 little cuts either side. They're a centimetre apart, well, depending on your closure, but most of them should be quite universal. And all we're going to do is, this is the receiving side of our little closure with the little indentation, and we just need to pass those little tabs through the front of our bag. Make sure that it's all nice, pushed nice and flat there, and then we're going to add the back, and all you need to do is fold those little tabs in. You can use a little tool if you like, but I find they fold in quite easily. Push them nice and flat, and that's got just your little receiving side. And then we do the same on the underside. You can see I've got my little marks made there, and we're going to pop those through. Make sure that fabric is pushed all the way down. And they really do give such a lovely little professional finish. I've bought a whole stack of these on eBay. And they're very inexpensive. You can buy them in singles in your local crafting stores. Pushing those down. And then we've got that lovely attachment there that will just click into place. So our next step is to go ahead and we're going to sew our side seams. So we're going to put our back and front together. Make sure they're all lined up, and we're just going to sew those side seams. Now my seam allowance in this one is probably closer to your 1/4 inch. I do try and keep mine to about 5 millimeters. So we're just going to make sure you really back and forth on the start and finish, and I do sew them 2 times, as I always do for strength, both sides. So I have those side seams stitched, and then I've just turned that one through, and I've been careful to make sure that I press the little seams open and flat at the top and bottom of that, and rolled the seam out here. And you'll find that easy to do because our wadding hasn't gone all the way to the seam line, so this little one turns very beautifully. So my next step, and it might not be a step you're adding, but I am adding a little lower ruffle to this bag, and now is the best time to add it. So what I've done here is I've put two pieces of lace together, so I've got a bit of extra volume there. I've just stitched one over the other, and I'm going to be adding that. I'll start at the back so my join isn't as obvious, but I'm going to be adding that just below. You can see I've also sewed my little buttons on, and going to be stitching that into place to sit nice and level with the edge there, because when we sew in our base we want to be able to flip that up out of the way so that we don't get that caught up in there. And once that base is put into place, sewn into place, you'll find that little ruffle will sit just like a little skirt out over the edge. You might be making this one just quite plain, and if you are, that little base goes in, and the finish on this is really lovely, so you don't actually have to add anything at all. But I'm going to go ahead and I will be adding that with that extra braid trim all the way around the edge. So I'm going to get that one all stitched into place. So there you can see I've got my little lower ruffle in place, and all of my detailing is done now, minimal on the back there. And now all I need to do is pop that one through, and we're going to sew in the base panel. And I'm going to make sure as I do this that I'm keeping that little lower ruffle well out of the way. So I take my base panel, and we're putting right sides together, and you've got your marks at the top and well, actually they're the sides, aren't they, at the sides. I'm used to sewing in little animal gussets. So what we're going to do is put our pin in at the seam allowance, which is about 5 millimeters, as I said, and we're going to line it up with one of those sides. We've got those nicely pressed open and flat, so that makes it easy. So we're going to anchor that one in this side, and then do the same thing, remembering if you've got ruffles on there to keep them well out of the way, and through that same mark the other side and straight through that seam there. And then it's just a matter of pinning that one into place right the way around each side. You'll find that one will fit in beautifully. Again, making sure that I'm keeping that ruffle out of the way. And I will continue on and pin that one all into place. And then we're just going to stitch that one in on the machine. Now, before I do that, I will actually take my extra strong thread and I will hand stitch an overcasting stitch all the way around that base plate, because it just makes it easier when I go to tuck that under the machine, because then I'm not dealing with pins. It does take a little bit longer, but I find it's worth it. So there we go, that has that base panel popped in nicely there, and I've just rolled those seams out. And just remember too with that one, if you're going for a particularly real patchwork sort of bag, you can always use a different fabric on that panel, because you get that lovely little bit showing underneath. So now we can put this one aside, because we need to go on and create our little flap ready, because it's going to be inserted in that seam. So what I've done there with the top part of that flap is that I've just ironed on my strip that I've given you the template for, strip for the middle, and I've gone ahead just like I did with the front of the bag and stitched that ric-rac either side. We've already got our little magnetic closure in place, so now all we need to do is line up those edges there, and we're going to stitch that same 5 millimeter seam allowance right around that edge there. Leave that top open, make sure you're back and forth on the start and finish. And there I have that front little tab turned through. I've given it a good press, and then I have just top stitched around that edge. It just gives it a nice professional finish. And just inside that seam allowance, just closed off that opening there. So that one's all ready when we're ready to add that to our bag. So now we're going to move ahead with making our lining. So before we put our lining together in much the same way as we did the bag outer, we're going to make that little pocket that's going to go on the inside. So what we're going to do is put our right sides together of our two pocket pieces that we've got there. I've got them pinned together. And I'm just going to stitch, I'm going to leave an opening at the top to turn through, and I'm just going to stitch back and forth there all the way down just to 5mm seam allowance as we've been doing. Finish off about here and make sure you're back and forth, and then we're going to turn that one through and give it a good press. And now I've got that pocket stitched up, I've actually pressed that one out and closed that top edge with a top stitch, and the lower edge I have top stitched as well. And then I've just folded that one up, and you can fold it up as much as you like. Mine's around about 6 centimetres is my fold up, because what I'm going to do, I'm then going to take one of my inside panels, they're both the same so it doesn't really matter. Where we're going to pop this one is probably around about 5 centimetres from the top edge. Remember, we're going to have a seam there, but we just want it accessible enough without it sitting too far down. So about 5 centimetres is just about right. Make sure that it's nicely centred, and then we're just going to stitch from the top there down, around and back up here. Make sure that you're back and forth on these junctions here. What that will give us is a pocket here and a pocket here to tuck some special things in. So I'm going to go ahead and get that one stitched into place. And there we go, so that has our pocket stitched nicely into place. You could add another one on the other side if you wish. And now we're just going to continue on following the same steps as we did when we put together our outer bag. So I've lined up those two pieces, and just as before, we're going to stitch back and forth here and back and forth here, so that side seam, same here on this side, and I will sew that one 2 times, and then I'm going to pin in and sew in my base piece just as I did with the other section here, as we did here. The only difference is that once we pin that in and go to stitch it, we're actually going to leave a large section of one side open. So all you need to do is follow everything that we did before, but leave a section open, because we're going to need that for pulling through, and leave it at least 15 centimetres open so that it's easy for us to pull everything through, because if you've got more detailing on your bag than I have, you'll want that little bit of room. So just the only part you stitch in is this lower section. Make sure you're really back and forth here and here when you're sewing in that base, so that we've got a nice strong finish when we go to turn it through. So I'm going to get that lining all made up and show you how that looks. Okay, so that has my lining all stitched up just as I did with the outer, and you can see, as I was saying, I've just left one side of that lower base panel open so that we can turn this one through. So all we need to do now, let's just turn that one through. Do make sure too that you've got those seams pressed at the top. When we put this bag together, we're going to need everything nice and flat, and it's better to press it now while you can. So we just turn that one through, make sure everything is pushed out nicely. That gusset, base there, roll those seams out, and that one will be ready to pop inside our bag. So before we do that though, let's go ahead and make the strap, just in case you don't want to add the hardware. We'll make the strap now, and you'll be able to see how to do that. So first of all, I've cut my strip. Now I've cut mine to 1 metre, so 100 centimetres, and that's probably the right size for perhaps a 10-year-old, your average 10, 11, 12-year-old, it'll sit just nicely. If you want it more of an adult size, I would cut that strip to 110 centimetres, or if somebody's taller, add that on. But do make your measurement based on who you're making it for. So I've cut that strip, and you can see there that what I like to do is I draw a line all the way down the centre of that strip, because it just helps me when I'm pressing. I then press each edge into meet almost at the middle, with just enough room for folding again. So press that all the way, and then I fold it again and press that all the way, so I've got a nice neat little strap. Then I'm just going to tidy those ends with a little zigzag stitch on either end. And then I'm going to sew a top stitch down each side, all the way down. And again, this is just to make it sit nice and flat, and also gives it a lovely professional finish. So our next step with our strap, now that it's all pressed nice and flat, I've got my stitching done, we're just going to take our lobster clips and you're just going to tuck it under. Just turn it up enough to be able to pop that under the machine and stitch across a couple of times just to keep that one in place. If you really don't like that raw edge, you can turn it under and then stitch it again. I actually like it quite flat, so I've got that zigzag line in place. So I will just go back and forth there a couple of times and do the same with the other side, and then that strap will be ready. So now that we have all of our components for our bag, let's go ahead and put this lining in. So first of all, you're going to take your outer bag pieces and you have to turn that one inside out. And we're going to add now either your little tabs for our little D-rings, and I'm going to be clipping those right across that seam. Do make sure that you've got those side seams pressed nice and flat there. And I have trimmed them down, but I don't want too much exposed, but I need to be able to sew around that top edge. So I'm just going to make sure I've got enough room to do that. And I'm going to clip those into place, and then I'm going to just go to the machine and stitch those in place. Now, alternatively, if you are going to be adding your strap, just stitching it in, you would do the same thing, because we would tuck all of our strap inside, just like that. And we would take our ends, which of course wouldn't have our lobster clips on them. And instead of stitching in that little tab, you would actually stitch in the edge of your little strap there. Make sure that it's not twisted as you clip up the other side and stitch across. So we just stitch it into place for now so that it's all holding together nicely there. So for when we go to sew around that top edge. Also, we have to add our back flap. Now, when you pop this one in, you want that outer edge right sides together with the outer edge of the bag. So you shouldn't be able to see what is going to be the top side of that flap. So you want to just get that one stitched into place also, just within that seam allowance. And once you've got those all nicely stitched into place, we can drop that lining in there. So now I've got those tabs in place and that back flap stitched into place. We take our liner piece, and that one is turned the right way out, and we're just going to tuck that one in. So what we're doing is right sides together. So what you're going to want to do is line up those side seams with the lining and the outside edge there. Use your clips or pins, whatever works best for you. Make sure they're nicely lined up. And then it's just a matter of fitting that lining into place all the way around that top edge. And once you've got that all clipped into place around the top, we're going to take that one to the machine. A free arm is best for this job, just to tuck that one under the machine. And we're going to stitch around that entire top edge with a roundabout, as I have been through at, about a 1/4 inch or about a 5mm seam allowance, making sure that you really back and forth over those little tabs and that back flap section, so that's nicely incorporated. Now once you have that top seam stitched, all we need to do is reach in that bag through that opening that we left in the lining, and we can pull the entire bag through and get all of those seams pressed out. Pull that lining over. Check that all of our joins are right and our tabs are well incorporated, which they are. Push the bottom of that bag out. I did trim that top seam. If you find you've got a few stray ends, it helps just to trim that seam so there's not too much bulk there. Now before we push this liner into the bag, we're going to close this opening. So the best way to do that is we're just going to pull those edges together. You'll find that'll tuck in nicely. You can give it a little press, and I'll just take that to my machine and stitch that closed. So I now have that bag all turned through. I've got my little opening stitched nicely in there. That lining is tucked through, and I've taken that one to the iron and given it a good press around that top edge to make sure that lining is sitting nicely inside. And then I've gone ahead and sewn a top stitch just about 4 to 5mm all the way around the top edge. You can see that just gives it a lovely finish, and we're all ready for our other bits and pieces. So all we need to do now is add our strap and pin our little badge decoration on the front. And also I've gone ahead and I've made one of my little tassels. I've added a few beads there, just a little trinket to hang from the side of that little D-ring there. It's a simple little felt tassel, and I have a video tutorial that shows you how to make that one. I'll put the link up the top there because it's such a sweet little finish. So let's put it all together and see how it looks. And so there we go, we have our completed patchwork bag. I've really enjoyed this one. I hope you have too. It's such a beautiful structured little bag, very, very professional, and with your little pocket inside. And just imagine all of the license prints that you can get. So you can really personalize this bag. So many little Disney prints that you can get. So I wish I had time to make more. But what I'll do is I'll just design new little bags for you all as we go along. So if you've enjoyed that one and you like making the little bags, if you're looking for something that's perhaps a little more simple, I've got my fox bag there, and they're just a very simple little design, little crossbody bags. And also I have my little vintage camper van there. Very, very sweet, make incredible gifts. So remember this one. Hope you've got someone to make this one for. I'm going to think about who to give this one to, but I love it. But I will definitely make some more for myself too. Make it up in a different style, more adult style, and I'll make sure that I show you. So thank you for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed it. Well, thank you all for watching today. I hope you've enjoyed seeing this little one come together. And I do want to remind you all that I do give my permission for you to make product from my patterns and sell them yourself. It's just a little way that I can pay it forward to you all. And this one would go particularly well selling online and at market. So I hope you have great success with that, especially because of all of the different colorways and the licensed prints that you can use. So I hope you all enjoy doing that. Make sure that you join our Facebook group, because it's a great little community to come along, and I want to see all of the little bags and all the little colours, because I'll never get to make enough to satisfy me. So you can do it for me and show me. I get much joy from that. You can alternatively follow me on Instagram, and you can send me messages via Instagram. Ask me any technical questions and I will do my best to help you out. Or you can follow me on Pinterest, and Lisa Pay on Pinterest, and you can also be a part of our special community board there. So lots of ways for everybody to interact, and I'm wishing you all a very creative week, just like I know I'm going to have. That's pretty normal for me, but I hope you all have one too. Thanks for all of your support, and looking forward to our next project together. So in the meantime, everybody stay safe and make sure you pay all of that good stuff forward. Till next time, it's Huru from me.